Hello.
Hi.
Everybody. Hello.
Live.
Let's see. It looks like we've started. You're now live. Wow.
Woo! A live button has never looked so good.
Oh my goodness. For everyone that's listening or watching, we've had some technical difficulties for the last 30 minutes, but we're here. Everybody
Now.
is alive and live and ready to go. So I want to first thank everybody who's out there listening and watching. And thank you for your patience and for watching us as we start another edition of Real Moments with Badass Women in Film and Entertainment. This is a podcast that we started a few years back. And it started after the, sorry, of course, my phone would ring as we get started. We started a few years back after the Women's International Film Festival. And what we realized is that we needed to continue the discussion. We needed to continue the discussion about empowering women because the festival only happened once a year. And, we would start all of these panels and have these great discussions. And then, we would all go back to our respective places. And we just felt that it was really important to continue the discussion about empowering women, about the fact that women only make up 7 to 12% of filmmakers, the fact that women of color as filmmakers are even like 2 or 3%. And just to continue the discussion about what the things that we're all dealing with. As filmmakers, as artists, we have a music producer with us, we have a filmmaker with us, and we're really just about empowering women's visions and voices. So basically, the whole idea is to have these panels, and now that we are all at our respective places pretty well, many of us are still at home, many of us are still working from home because of the COVID pandemic. I think this is even more important. So this is basically, we're live after this. We will then put it up on iTunes and Stitcher and Spotify and Pandora and all of the places where podcasts can be found. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Yvonne McCormick-Lyons. I'm the founder of the 2-time award-winning Women's International Film Festival. I don't say that very often. And I sometimes we do some things that are rewarded. And also the founder of a brand new streaming platform. What we say, it's a streaming platform for women by women, and it's called WIFF-TV. And these two ladies who are beside me on your screen, they are the director and one of the people that's featured in one of the films that we have on WIFF-TV. And again, this podcast is designed to celebrate women in the film and entertainment and arts industries. We focus on promoting our projects, and at the same time, allowing those women who've gotten to a certain point in their careers to give back. So, there's always a question at the end, which is like, what would you do? If, for people who are, 15 years prior to where you are now. So just look out for that question, you too. So anyway, for everybody else, relax, grab a coffee, grab a glass of wine. Maybe at this point, I think I could do with a glass of wine after the technical difficulties, and relax. And then, also know that you can ask your questions, and any of us would be more than happy to answer them. And let me just introduce my guests. So first, we have Nicole Sorochan, who is an award-winning director. She's passionate about reinventing entertainment through the story world building and cross-platform experiences. And that's something that I definitely want to talk to you about, this whole idea of transmedia. And I know that's what you're doing as well, Blantron. So just in terms of being able to find people where they are, right? So regardless, particularly now in these days, we're no longer just unilateral in terms of how we look at projects and how we look at media. So she specializes in hybrid genres while focusing her work on creating impact for global audiences. Nicole's most recent platform project, Amplify Her, which is one of the films that is on our streaming platform WIFF-TV. She also recently launched Hipster Bait, a new platform that gamifies real-world discovery music. And I think that's amazing through an app. So we'll talk about all of that. And she got her start in 2008 working for Current TV. That was Al Gore's project, I believe, or part of his network. And you're also the CEO of Hidden Bands, an augmented reality series. So experience. And then, she's focused on film, and she's spoken at TEDx and animation festivals and just really been everywhere. So thank you, Nicole, for being here. And sorry for the long introduction, everybody, but Nicole is just awesome and has been there, done this. I was really excited when I learned about her project that screened at the Women's International Film Festival in New York City in 2019. And when I found that she was doing other things with it, it was becoming a comic book and then an animated series. I was just so excited to meet her. That's it behind you. So maybe you could take it out and show it. So I just wanted to thank you for being here. And then we have Blanchan, who is this amazing music producer. She's a great storyteller by producing music. She's renowned as booty club and house DJ. She has recently reincarnated as a 3D metaverse robot in human form. And I'm hoping we'll be able to show that. I think that's just so amazing. She's a testament to the possibilities of a virtual embodiment of self, and it continues to bring butt melting vibes to real and virtual events all over the world. And that's totally amazing, particularly now that you can do virtual as well. She's also the founder of and CEO of, is it Loki? Loci, a serious game engine for risk reduction that transforms unstructured location and occupancy data into digital components that power a game. We're going to talk about all that and what that means. So welcome, both of you. Thank you for being part of this edition of Real Moments. Again, sorry for the technical difficulties, but let's roll this. And thank you for being live. So Nicole, I'm going to start with you. So you started off, or at least working in television, and then you went to, documentary films. And tell us how you made and why you made that transition. I know that you were way back, was it in 2007, you were with television, that transition from television into documentary filmmaking. And then, of course, the story of how Amplify Her came to be.
Yeah, so I think for me, the moment that changed everything for me and actually put me more square in the realm of documentary / transmedia was an event that happened in LA called that Invisible Children put on, and I think it was around 2007.
Sorry, my phone is just, as much as I'm trying to turn it off. Okay. Yeah, run all day, right? And of course, sorry,
so they did. Sorry for the intro. No worries. They did this really cool project called Displace Me, where they actually brought people together, had a big cinema screen in with people from Uganda that were in displacement camps. They had people wear like a red X, show up, create their own house essentially out of cardboard to displace themselves for one night. And just connected cities all across the US and also in Africa in a way that had never been seen before in 2007. And for me, when I saw how powerful that was, everything that I've been focused on has been around creating change and impact. And I feel like storytelling and film is one of the best ways to deliver that. And similarly, I feel like film only goes so far. Just to go right back to why you're doing these sort of podcast series. So there are always more kernels, more information, and other media types where we can delve deeper into the worlds that we create. So that's sort of why I veered off into documentary storytelling, but even more so transmedia producing and building these big story worlds to make the largest amount of impact and to meet audience. You said it perfectly in your opening, but to meet audiences where they are.
Yeah, and the great thing about filmmaking and the world of film is that you've got the audio and the video, and that can combine together and be very powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think for Amplify Her, to answer the second question, so I'm one of the co-directors. The other co-director is Ian McKenzie. And initially he had asked me, we had just finished working on another project together, and he wanted to work on another one. And so he had asked me if I felt like creating a film about women DJs. And I know, Blantron, you can also attest to this. When he proposed the question to me first, I was like, I actually wanted to swear, but like, hell no, or whatever. Like, I didn't actually want to do it at the time because I hated the idea of telling this story where all of a sudden we were sort of focusing on the problem from framing it as a why aren't there more of, which I think is a very important context for us. But it's also something that I've kind of grown up trying to fight against so much, because I wanted to be, I'm just like, I don't want to hear that rhetoric. I want to create my own path. I want to create my own destiny. I want to do what I want to do. It was interesting enough, and I know Sam/Blantron can also join in on this, is she also had the same sort of reverse reaction. But when he told me what question he was actually going after, it intrigued me because I didn't know what it meant. And so he started by saying, that's not the question I want to ask. I want to ask, what is unique about feminine in music, and how can we, what happens when we allow it to flourish? And so for me, I'm like, first of all, what the heck is feminine energy or feminine music or feminine anything? Like, I didn't love the framing of it either, but I didn't know what it meant, and I wanted to discover what it meant. And so when we started so I said yes to the project. He also said that I would be allowed to build the story world, which is the part that I loved the most. We went out and started filming the film, and what it did for me was literally put a mirror up and make me look at my relationship with women and my relationship as being a woman in the world, with a giant mirror going, okay, like, whoa, you need to be deprogrammed in the way that you're thinking about things. And so, and I did a little TEDx talk about that whole experience just from the filmmaker side. And so that is why and how I started the Amplify Her project, which may be shocking, because I'm not necessarily saying that argument is not valid. I'm just saying that it is something that we wanted to move past and let's show what it looks like when women really get the freedom to express themselves in new, exciting ways that they've never been able to before. Yeah.
I find that interesting because I think that would have been my first question as well, like, why aren't there more? And it's interesting that you didn't think that was the best way to explore the subject. Which is what I would have done. I would have said, oh yeah, let's talk about the fact that there's which is what I do, right? That's part of what I do with the film festival. I talk about the fact that there's a lower, number of women in the industry. Typically we don't you're right. We wouldn't explore it that long because we go into different components of that and different aspects of that. So, yeah. But it did allow you to go deeper. And that was your same response as well, Blondie?
Yeah. It's fine. Blondie's cute too. I like that. Yeah, I guess same as Nicole, was really trying to, I think especially, being aware of where you sit on a scale of opportunity based off the color of your skin and your gender is something that I think is important. But I think to have a nuanced conversation about what it means to create spaces that let that energy flourish is a better way to frame the question, because it's more exploratory instead of accusational or accusatory, right? Which it's easy to point some fingers at some pretty obvious problems, but I think by focusing on what the space looks like when it is flourishing, it gives you something to imagine, as opposed to sort of a lot of documentaries leave you mad, And I think that this one was focused more on getting you comfortable with different stories, different heroes' journeys, sort of the anti-hero's journey, and then also showing what situations are like when you can play exactly the way you want to play to the crowd you want to play to, and there's this like magic that happens. And what's different about that versus traditional, maybe male dominated spaces or performances, and a lot about different ways that the feminine is captured by women, because it's, as opposed to seeing themselves as feminine representative, seeing it more as a sort of maybe energy archetype that gets embodied into people in different ways through story worlds, right? Like your brand and your artist name and kind of this persona is a story world. And I think it was a more, it definitely let the film take off in more directions, I think, than maybe you guys even originally imagined, especially when the comic side was added to it, which I'll let Nicole speak about because I think it's really interesting, but it was like, it had a huge impact on me, so.
Yeah, I think it's just amazing. What I was thinking I would do is hopefully the technical part of this presentation will work out. I do have the trailer queued up for the original Amplified Her. So I want to play that because I think it will kind of explain some of what you said earlier, Blondtron, and then we can pick up the conversation. So let's hope everything works. I'm going to bring it into the stream, fingers crossed, because the way things have been going this afternoon. I'm going to bring it into the stream, and then I'm going to take us out, and then we'll get it to play. You know what? It doesn't look too bad with 4. Should we just keep that in so that we can all look at it? I think that's not too bad that way.
Do it.
All right, let's play.
Until very recently, I believed
that gender should have nothing to do with
the fact that I'm a woman should be irrelevant.
Female sexual energy is so insanely powerful that it's scary. Energy is so insanely powerful that it's scary for a lot of people.
It's like a bottomless abyss of
creative energy.
I create the music as a frame for the transmission of voice.
And that's the power of that
amplification that comes through being on these massive sound systems.
I think women are especially
we're naturally tapped
into that realm of emotional space.
If the crowd is like
where I'm going with something, then I will change it.
It's all about the empathic
It's all about the empathic connection with them.
There's been quite a few times where
I could have quit.
I wanted community. I didn't have it. I've been running since I can remember, since I can walk. Just never stops. In fact, I was
extremely depressed and I wanted to kill myself for years because of my condition.
Person I'm supposed to be. She's inside of me, and that's what hurts.
I don't want to live
in a world where I'm not a brilliant businesswoman living out my dreams and a DJ that makes music and talks about vaginas and sex, which is a complete and utter lie because I am exactly both of those things.
Cool. Cool. It's funny because let me get it out. It's funny because when I heard you talk, Blondtron, about kind of being this entire woman, that you don't have to be part this and part that, and that was kind of one of the questions I wanted to ask you in terms of, who we can be as women as opposed to what society says that we're supposed to be.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is what you're willing to put up with. That's what I've
What do you
It's
mean by
like,
that?
I think when you're wanting to, a lot of it is like when you think about what everybody's capacity is, I guess from an outside perspective. So like not a first person experience, like taking myself out of my own experience and like looking at it kind of from above. I'd say that a lot of the resilience that you build is through things hitting at your shell, you know, and that at a certain point, you want to realize, you have to realize how much energy you're putting into predicating what you're trying to be, as opposed to just being that thing. And for me, it's something I struggled with a lot. I think, you know, I would go by my dad's last name. I go by Sam when I do business stuff a lot, if it's by over email, to make things a little easier sometimes. And then I think you know, when I was younger and I had more energy, I was much more like in your face about it. And that was kind of my brand as an entertainer, was to sort of create that space for like vulnerability and rawness. Like instead of it just being a way that you talk with your girlfriends behind closed doors, like being a little bit more out there with how you really are. And because just like men are often praised for it. Like, you know, like I always give the example of like, you know, the Red Hot Chili Peppers wearing socks on their like cocks for a show. And it's like, they're seen as like hilarious, right? And there's just this kind of like lack of humor around the female body that has kind of been lost a bit. I think burlesque had it right, the sort of in the earlier days where it was more about the whole act of like sexuality as a tease, as something kind of funny, right? And that kind of had been stripped away slowly over time. And like, I guess that was like what I was really trying to bring back. But then the repercussions of that are like, it follows you around everywhere you go. And, you know, then people just assume that you're always like vulgar in this or this type of way. And it takes up a lot of space in the room if you have other things to offer. And so for me, it was something that I felt like I had to kind of transform out of. And the film really helped me do that because of the comic. I was like, at the time, like still sort of wearing the golden handcuffs of like, it's nice to get paid a few $1,000s to play a festival for a day, you know, and that kind of was a nice, like comfortable thing. But it was also like I was starting my business and wanting to, like finding the energy of maintaining both really tiring. And when we were finishing the comic as part of the film, it let me kind of let this character I'd created live in a story world, as opposed to just being like this timeline. Because we kind of converted from these like just straight timelines to like these algorithm feeds. And so it's like the way that we were all being kind of interpreted stopped being a shared experience of time. And then even with that, like, what do? Do you just like archive that part of yourself? Like, I'm not ashamed of it. I just don't want it. It just doesn't define how I spend all my time. So I guess to answer your question, it's like, how good are you at compartmentalizing and creating context for other people? Because that's like how you actually can maintain your energies across being multiple different things that aren't necessarily like congruent to the average person. So like boundaries, being hyper aware of your energy, and then deciding like that you can, I guess I find story is a nice, neat way to put a bow on a piece of your life, and like make it friendlier for your brain to store and make it not like maybe trigger you in the wrong moment in an emotion or something like that, which is just very much how our bodies and minds work. And so I guess like how to balance that and to answer that question, it's like, I don't know, I still haven't figured it out. I think the main thing I'm trying to figure out are what are those boundaries, because you can get mad at somebody for not seeing your whole you, but then you're like, wait, the world is moving really fast. How am I displaying this? And like usually a nice little story bio or a few pictures is all the attention people have. So I guess thinking about how you can simplify your own experience for yourself is like the first step in making those boundaries and containers that then lets you come in and out of them well, as opposed to kind of, you know, I think a lot of creatives feel like called into something manically, you know, and then like you're all this thing, right? And then it's like you come out of that and you're like, I just want a normal life. And it's like, I don't know, this is for me a lot of my creative experience. And so it's just like this, like that transition in and out of creative experience and like creative persona, finding good ways to do that is hard. And I think that the opening is putting it in a story world is a nice way to do it.
Yeah. And I don't think it's necessarily you, right? I don't think it's necessarily, and I'm going to say that to you and to all of the creative people out there, and we all are creative, or to all of us who have different passions, the multi-passionate people, right? I think that many of us, and I know I've always got about a half dozen things going on at the same time. I just, as much as I try to just say, okay, just focus on this, it's just very difficult. But I think what it is, it's other people. I don't think it's you. I think other people need, or maybe I'm going to say need. I feel like they need to compartmentalize you. I think they need to, you know, think of you in one way. And when you are doing this and doing that and multifaceted, it's like they feel like they need to have you in this box. And this is how they think of you. They think of you as this person who does this in this box, as opposed to this person who's blooming and has all different kinds of things going on and is blooming in different ways into, you know, this flower with a lot of different petals, and each of the petals is going in a slightly different direction, and it's all got maybe slightly different colors. You know, maybe it's got a hue of purple and then a hue of pink and then a hue of, you know, white, but all together it's what makes it beautiful, right? It's this, you know, and I think we often just sometimes people need to put you into this box, and if you don't fit in this box, it's like they don't get it, and that can be very frustrating for somebody who, like yourself, who, as you said, maybe you're transforming, or maybe, you know, it's making you feel like you've got to now go in one direction or another. And I was wondering how people, you know, did respond to you. You know, how did they respond to you when they saw you being?
Nicole had a good response to me, which should have changed. So she's a good person to give like an account of what like initial impression to like understanding Blondtron would be.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's like, it's like a loaded question, because there's two sides of it, right? So there's like the people who obviously, I mean, and yeah, this is another thing. When I initially saw Blondtron on stage, and I can say this with complete humiliation, but I initially did judge her. I initially saw her up on stage, and when I went to go interview for her for the first time, my agenda, though I'm also a documentary filmmaker, so I know that that agenda can shift and change, and that you need to be objective, was to use, to hear what Blondtron had to say as potentially an example of like what not to do. And we can both laugh at that now, you know,
yeah,
because
that was a lot of people's reaction.
Yeah, and what I didn't do though, and this is the thing, and this is also, yeah, it's like in that TEDx talk that I went through, but what I didn't do when I was very much trying to film, I wasn't trying to participate in what she was doing on stage. The moment I did participate, it was a completely different experience, because the reality is what Sam was doing on stage, or what Blondtron does on stage, is freeing and it's liberating, and everything is coming from a very authentic place. Like, she has so much power, and like I've learned so much about her backstory, and everything is like honestly truly authentic to who she is deep down inside. And when you are on stage, regardless of what kind of expression you have and you're putting out, and you put something that is authentic to you, what it does is it gives energy to the crowd. And so if you're a participant in that crowd, you're receiving energy to then explore, in the case of what Sam was doing, a lot of sexuality, and just feeling free and able to feel sexual without any judgment. But what happens when you do it and it's not authentic to who you are deep, because it's not to say that, you know, again, like the Amplify Her project is really looking at various different kinds of feminine expression. There can be like Closey is the exact opposite, you know, and if she tried to do what Blondtron was doing, the opposite energy is going to be felt. It's going to feel awkward. It's going to feel forced. It's going to actually detract from that overall experience. And so I think, yeah, so my initial impression was like, because I wasn't participating or I wasn't actually seeing what she was creating, I immediately judged her, and that's something I won't do to women again. I've learned my lesson. Do not do that. Because when I talked to her the day after, and I talked about this a lot, when we interviewed her, she blew my mind. Like when we went to that interview, everything she had to say was eloquent. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew exactly what she was putting out into the world. And I started to see her really, and I literally, like, every judgment I had was like immediately gone. And I was like, this, and at the time when we were doing that, she was not a main subject in the film. She immediately became one, because I was like, this is exactly the kind of exploration we need to do. And similarly, when the film launched, I think so many women were so positively impacted by her on screen and her story. And simultaneously, we were very much judged by, I would say, a lot of people, especially in whereby they essentially thought that, again, like the expression or the journey we were going on was incorrect. So we did actually receive, like, you know, both positive and negative feedback as like what feminism should be from a perspective. But I am unapologetic in absolutely every single choice that I made in that movie. And I think that, you know, if you watch it and you hold your judgment and you allow it to do what it does, you will literally leave the film a changed person, because wow. the intimate and vulnerable stories that the ladies shared in the movie.
Yeah. And I love that the perspective that you took, which I mentioned earlier, was not like, okay, you know, a lot of talking heads about why women are not, but it's almost like, well, the women who are there, like, what are they bringing to the table? Like, how are they making, you know, it different? And how are they adding such an amazing, you know, energy to this traditionally male dominated field, this male dominated area, right? And so it's to me, it was refreshing to see that, because I hadn't seen a lot of female DJs, and then you were highlighting them. I'm like, and the name of the film, Amplify Her, yeah, that's what it's about. You know, that's what WIFF was about, you know, empowering women's visions and women's voices, right? And so this whole idea of, you know, looking at who we are, but not from a, as you said, Blondtron, where I think when you were saying that, you know, sometimes to me, what I interpreted was that people can get very defensive if you're asking why not, like they're going to feel that, you know, we're blaming, particularly men. They may often feel like you're blaming the men, you know what I mean? Which is okay. But if you take it from a different angle, then it's not really so much about that as it is, you know, the world that they're using.
The angle of it becomes like one layer deeper, which is like usually a reason there is a lack of is because representation hasn't been there, so people don't even consider it a possibility for them, and we're dealing with still the tail end of that, right? And so if you're actually trying to solve the issue of why are there less, then it's like, oh, well, we need to create representation. So if we tell stories of success and the hardships that get there, then people will be able to see that they can do this as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so let me ask you a quick question, and then I want to get back to Nicole. But Blondtron, what did you find, maybe in as quickly as we can say it, and I know it would probably be difficult to say this quickly, but what would you say has been the most difficult part of, well, what's been the best part and the most difficult part of being a woman in a male dominated industry?
I think the part is like trying to find like Nicole and I said early on, like what you're like trying to not have gender define you on either side. I think that was something I struggled with, because like women supporting women is like, we sort of danced around with this subject today, is like old school versus new school feminism, of like, or just, you know, people that are uncomfortable with certain kinds of people saying things versus like the message. And, you know, we kind of lived in that, like, if a bunch of people who watched the Britney Spears documentary this year or in the last year were probably reminded of how women used to interrogate women about their, you know, purity and how they were representing other women. And I think that still is something that's deeply ingrained in a lot of women, which is like how women should be representing what their idea of women supporting women looks like. And I think, you know, obviously mine is always like, you should be more curious, right? And like be open to a lot of different interpretations of women. And so I think the hardest part, but also like the most rewarding part, is the challenging everyone's assumptions about what women supporting women looks like, women and men. And then the kind of richness of the relationships and conversations you do get when people stick around through it. The breakthroughs that you get when people are on both sides of the gender spectrum are willing to have kind of those conversations about what really matters, and actually what spectrum of experience and representation looks like, and that being very broad as opposed to sort of encampment like.
Yeah, it goes back to that same thing, right? That we are, you know, expected, or, you know, to be a certain way and act a certain way and look a certain way. And if we step outside of that, I think oftentimes people don't know what to do with it. And so what ends up happening is, you know, it becomes judgmental. And it's really unfortunate sometimes, or many times, when it's women doing this to women, right? I remember one time, and it's off topic, but it's still the same topic. I was watching, I was either watching or reading something. There's a woman who is on a television network. I can't remember her name, but her and her husband host a morning show on MSNBC. The show's called Morning Joe. And she was, I think it was a book she had written, but she was talking about how difficult it was for her when she first started. So there was two sides. There was one side where they didn't really have, the studio didn't really have, you know, the things that she needed to, you know, look well. And then the other side was that most of the criticism she got about how she looked, and when I say look well, I mean, you know, just the additional stuff like the makeup and stuff that she would have expected, you know. But she said that most of the criticism that she got was from women, you know, whether they were criticizing her dress or criticizing her hair or criticizing, everything. And it just became like, you would think that it would have been the other way around, right? That they would have been supporting her as being a co-host of this morning talk show. And it became about like what she's wearing, right? You know,
I think something people just keep perpetuating what their oppressors have done to them as like a way for you to prove yourself, right? And so that's something like, even in venture capital, that was like a big thing that came out about that, where, oh, we need more women in venture capital, then we'll fund more women companies. It's like, well, there's been a 5% increase in venture capitalists that are women, and the actual amount of women getting funded has decreased. And so we have to actually look at the fact that how we're biased is a part of so much conditioning that like we need to put sort of fail safes in place of our own behavior to kind of make sure that we're checking on ourselves, and like, are we taking in the full story, or are we kind of reacting based off of some conditioning?
Yeah. I know, Nicole, you said you had, apprehension about doing a film dealing with exploring women and these kinds of things. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And also tell me how you identified the women that you ended up featuring in the film.
Yeah, I mean, I think just struggling with it myself was just a lot of what we've just been talking about, which I think is so incredibly important was not realizing how much bias I also had. So I also run a tech company, and the majority of the people I was hiring at the time were men. And when women came into the interviews, I had subconscious judgments that I'm ashamed of now, to be quite honest, that I've worked really hard at to start to be sort of a lot more open and shift in so many ways. And I think the reality is we're always growing, we're always learning. There's always some kind of subtle conditioning, and it's really about identifying what that is, and then, you know, seeing how that sits for you, and then and thinking about who you want to be in the world. And for me, I really do want to be someone who advocates for women and you know, shines a spotlight on people that are so worthy of it. And like my relationship with Sam, with Blantron, has blossomed since making the film. I honestly think she's one of the most brilliant women in the room. I've seen how much she struggled, and I've also seen how hard she works. And like, yeah, and when you asked me, you know, who I wanted to feature on the show, it was hands down Sam, just to see how far, you know, she's really worked, and not just in her music career, but just in her own path and her own journey. The way we selected women in the film, so we did have some initial inspiration from one of the characters that Ian had identified early on, Apple Cat. That he had identified sort of that feminine energy in her music initially. And so she was definitely a central character right from the get-go, as being sort of something that where he initially said, hey, there's something different about this person's music. What is it? So we had explored her as a character. And then from there, we interviewed a lot of women. And what we were looking for was very different stories. Very stories that allowed us to experience very different versions of feminine expression and adversity.
Nice.
We also carefully weren't looking for, like in one cut, we had one of the characters wasn't getting along with her boyfriend that was also heavily at the time featured in the film. And we actually chose against showing that typical drama, and instead focused on what she was going on in her own life and in her own journey and what was important to her. And like the typical thing is when you're making a movie is like, where do you find those peaks and valleys of drama? And for us, it was so important for us to show any men in the film. That didn't happen spontaneously within production, because there was a great example of Sam and a whole situation that happened live. But our goal was to show men that were actually like supporting women in a very positive way, subtly, so that also again became something that people could walk out and like be like, what was different about that movie? Like, you know, what was the feeling? Can we have male characters that we can also look up to, and the way that they are, and the way that they're going about supporting women is a positive way, and so that you have again role models that are showcasing, you know, what does it look like to support a woman in music, and what does it look like? What does feminine expression look like? Well, the reality is it looks like everything, and we, you know, we are limitless in our expression and our ability to express in different forms. Yeah.
Tell me about that process from moving from the documentary and saying, hey, I want to put this in, you know, an animated form, and whether it was the book or whether it was the videos.
Yeah, so it was very much a creative process with many people involved in coming up with that concept. But the idea for me was wanting to bring interesting people into, like, what was the best channel for a cross-platform story? And when we started to look at the characters in the film, who are obviously real people, we started to think about like what makes sense. And when we saw these incredible like personas and energy. And we saw how visual they were. We also thought about the auditory perspective of it. The initial thought was the motion comic. So to create a motion comic whereby we could tell a deeper story that was literally from not my perspective, the director, but Blondtron's perspective. Like, what was she actually feeling? So in many respects, the motion comics, which are available on WIFF-TV, were from the perspectives of not me, the director, but they were definitely the characters. And I wanted to stay out of it because oftentimes, you know, and I mean, Blondtron, you can probably talk about what the experience was like creating your own story and having the opportunity to do that. But oftentimes we don't give ourselves those kinds of opportunity. And so I think the real rawness and the vulnerability in each one of the characters is best seen in the motion comic series. And one of the reasons we chose something animated was because I also wanted to hear the character's voice, real voice, because they are real, and also wanted their music to play into the mixture because that is a part of their expression. So it was, how can we allow different types of female creatives, so in this case, an illustrator, an animator, and then a music producer, each shine in their own like amazing skill, when combined turned into something absolutely beautiful. And along the course of creating the motion comic, we're like, well, we're technically creating a graphic novel anyway, so we might as well create that too. So we ended up creating the graphic novel. There's also a soundtrack. There's also a making of behind the scenes series. So there's like lots to like wormhole into.
I'm going to see if I can, again, technology allowing us, see if I can show the trailer for the animated series. Let's hope that the
make sure you mute your view when you play it.
Okay.
And then it'll play the right audio.
Okay. Hopefully that will work. All right. So I'm going to see if I can share my screen. Can you see that? Let me see. Maybe I need to move it in. Okay. All right.
Everybody mute.
Try it again.
Is it frozen for you, Nicole? Oh, you're muted. I'm gonna mute again.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Oh.
I think we lost her in that. But we could, yeah, I mean, maybe while we wait for her, you could tell us about the experience of being transformed into Blondtron.
Yeah. That was really cool. That was, I wasn't expecting that. And I think that was like, I think you should turn that whole workshop you designed for us to tell our stories into a workshop that like happens every year, because it's such a unique experience to kind of think of yourself. Comic is a very visceral way of storytelling, you know? you're already like thinking of scenes and settings and whatnot. And rather than try and write like autobiographically, it allows you to play more with traits and tropes and kind of archetypes. And I think that is way more how we live kind of in our mind emotional realm. You know, like there's kind of the story that we tell or like the account that we get from our friends maybe of what happened, but the way we remember things is far more like emotionally driven, I think. And so being able to, hi.
I'm
was
back. I don't know what happened.
It's okay. I was just explaining what it was like being turned into a comic.
Yes.
And yeah, it was being able to write a story that was more around like, okay, what if this was 1,000 years in the future and you were still kind of like trying to get the essence of like who you are out. Like it just, the first comic I went to write, which is like, I didn't know was a part of the thing. Like we first get paired up with our groups. So there's the animator and the illustrator, and you know, it's like, okay, come up with a first draft story. And then it's like, you have to throw it away and start again the next day. That's part of the whole workshop. And so I was like, that original story was about this like multifaceted woman, or this woman that wore many masks. And I think that kind of ended up becoming part of Applecat's throughput, was like these wearing these different masks, and like masks that serve you to protect you versus ones you put on to kind of become something else. And for me, that was like kind of the initial story I wanted to tell. And I think that that's so many women's stories. But then when we had to throw it away and start again, and I got to sort of dive a little bit deeper, more into like the sort of somatic feeling of sound. And like it was cool because I realized I was able to tell the story of this sort of bot becoming sentient, like learning, like kind of being put out into this world as this certain packaged way, which was like sort of meant to be the bombshell persona. And then the journey of discovering what that can be like through sound. And so like the first time she falls, you hear a bass tone, and then like more sounds build. And so kind of trying to tell the story of like learning and growing in consciousness through sound was something. And then having my dad be in it as my inventor, and like add in all and pull all these archetypes that are actually like deeply rooted in my emotional being, and use a comic as a backdrop for this story world. Let me then, once that was complete, I like all of a sudden was like thinking like a Marvel Enterprise, where I'm just like, what's my origin story? You know, like okay, so if my origin story is now, if that's like this story in the future, like who's the first Blondron? Like what's her, like how does she become a bot? Right. And then it made me sort of lean into who I am as like a creator and an inventor and an entrepreneur, and like actually kind of like throw some gas on that persona. I think like be like, get a cool old car and build your office in a garage, and like get a big dog, and like have all the characters and the vehicles and the setting that you want to live in be your reality, and like kind of steal that skyline out of your comic dreams and put it into your reality a bit more. That was like game changer for me. Like I want everybody to have that experience of putting to bed an old persona in a like very, you know, heavily symbolic story world, like a comic, you know, like a hero's journey, literally, or an anti-hero's journey. Yeah,
that's cool. And I think that's how I interpret, that's how I feel about these the comics, right? That's how I feel about this. And it's like, you know, they're coming from who they are and turning into, you know, the transformation into this hero, right? And I think it's just a beautiful interpretation. I'm gonna try, I don't know what happened last time. I'm gonna try one more time. I want to see if I can bring up your what you did the music and the like this whole. I'd like to see if I can bring it in without having, you know, I'm taking the risk here because we've been having technical issues, but I really, really think I'd love people to see it. And then after this, we'll wrap up. We'll just kind of ask a couple of final questions, but I really would love to see if I could bring this in.
Oh, yes. We get to see how you extended it further.
Yeah. Let's see if how this works.
Just make sure we all mute again.
Okay.
Let's see, hit play.
I think my computer is working overtime and it's like, you're doing too much with me.
We can always just share the link.
Yeah, we can do that. But I don't know why it's not going. Everything was cute and ready to go. Doesn't seem like it wants to.
Well, they can search that on YouTube and see if they're watching, and we can link to it.
So I'll just pause it.
Yeah,
See what happens.
I'll describe the video. It's basically I have a
it there because
perfect.
Okay,
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, that was so amazing. I wanted to I mean, you incorporated this. Tell me what's the word to describe this image of you on, you know, rocking it on the DJ.
I did a mix. It's called a motion capture suit. So it's this suit I have is a Rococo suit, and it has facial capture on my phone, and then I have gloves and a suit, and so I can DJ the set in my office, and then upload it into a body that I have, like different Blondtron skins, like avatars, to play in different worlds. So you can see more like metaverse shows happening these days. So like Travis Scott and whatnot. And I guess I'm just exploring the kind of cheaper edge use case of what would it mean to be a DJ that's now trying to get shows at different like if you think of different platforms in the metaverse as like different clubs. Being able to have the root file of a performance, and then the different skins and in different formats for different platforms, depending on what avatar type they take. But the ability to really have the core file, like the master file of that performance, so that it can then come to life in different worlds, is where I'm exploring now these days. Because again, with the dissociation and the space that creating a comic world for Blondtron gave me, I'd like to keep that. space between my own personal identity and like the identity of a performer, but like still continue her story world. And so that's sort of my new exploration there.
Well, that was amazing. I loved that. I love that. And I saw that you incorporated parts of the animated series with Amplify Her. And it was just amazing. And not to mention the music was rocking. And so I'm looking at it and I'm moving. So
Awesome.
I think it's really exciting. And I'm really, really going to be following you to see where you go with that. That's just wonderful. So I'm just going to ask a last question because we're close to an hour and I think I could probably be here all day with you guys. If Nicole, I mean, to me, just amazing doing something from television to films to animated series where I know you brought together like a whole bunch of women to work on these projects to, a comic book, which to me is just ultimately just so creative. What would you say to somebody who is, just starting out and thinking about, maybe becoming a filmmaker, maybe becoming a documentarian? What advice would you give?
You're muted. There you go.
Oh,
Just like, it doesn't show the line very well, so I'm like, I couldn't tell. So what would I say to a young documentarian? Just jump in and find your voice. Really, ultimately, I think there's no boundaries to creativity, and I feel like it's always good to have inspiration to look at people and projects that that have an impact on you, whether it's through style or through voice. But ultimately, you have something in you that is probably very unique, a cool perspective, an interesting format to tell stories, and just to lean in and see what you come up with. Yeah. No boundaries to creativity.
yeah. So don't be. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And what about you, Blantron? What would you say, Sam, to people who may be interested in following in your footsteps?
Oh, just never take advice from people who aren't asking you questions, because you're your own expert. I wish I learned that sooner, but I think that's, if you want to follow your path, you need to surround yourself with people who ask you the right questions. And if you want to help other people find their path, you have to be willing to ask them the right questions. And learning how to ask good questions and be curious is, I think, at the heart of any really worthwhile journey.
So meaning that they are not, what do you mean by not asking you the right questions?
Well, just like, I think a lot of times people want to give you advice, right? Be it somebody who's been in your footsteps before, like they've done it before, so they want to tell you how to do it, as opposed to helping you discover how to do it. And so I find the best mentors, the best people, like Nicole, like getting really to the heart of asking good questions, is she's become a big mentor and friend in my life. And I think it builds really, truly lifelong stories when you ask the right questions, because they kind of becomes a throughput or a guide to a life of discovery, right? So even if those questions are like, why am I doing this, and making sure you check in with that all the time. Who do I really want to reach? And just, when you're seeking advice from people, I want to do this thing, or I want to have this success from you. Making sure that they kind of, you're listening for the advice that comes in the form of the right questions to ask, because you can't repeat anybody's path, right? And so that's, I guess, to add some more nuance to it, that's what I now listen for, is like advice that comes in the form of setting me up to ask myself all the right questions and answer them in the right order, because that's usually, again, nobody's going to be able to really tell you what to do. And if that's the life you're going to live, then you're not really trying to go down a path like myself or Nicole, right?
Yeah, I think like just to follow up on that, it's like an open, like almost like an open question where it's discovery and it doesn't have an agenda.
Yeah, totally. We lost Yvonne. I have to run to another thing, but I sure loved hanging out with you.
Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. I guess you can find me on Twitter at sam.loci. And that's pretty much, and my music is Blondtron on SoundCloud. I don't really have it all up on Spotify yet. I'll get there.
And you can find Amplify Her project pretty much everywhere under Amplify Her. Check out the website. There's lots of amazing behind the scenes content on it, as well as all the links on where to get it. And if you want to watch the motion comic series, definitely check out Blondtrons, and it's available on WIFF-TV.
Yeah, I'm going to be sharing that link too. That's great. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, we've had a lot of tech issues today. It looks like we're still recording. I don't know if we are still in Facebook, if the ladies are able to pop back on. Maybe they can. I just wanted to thank them so much for being with us. I seem to have lost them. But also wanted to let you know that their film is available this weekend for free on WIFF-TV.com. We have the URL here, Independence Day 2022, WIFF-TV.com, Independence Day 2022. And we also have a special for $2 per film. Very odd edition of it looks like. We have to go. Sam Mathews and Nicole Sorochan for being here, being part of the special edition of Real Moments. And we'll have to edit it and get it back up on YouTube in a way that is edited and complete and together. And I thank you again for watching. All the best. Bye-bye. See you next time.